Some of you will already, thank you. Yeah, some of you will already know Bodhinaya. He has done talks on the Sangha Nights before, which have been really enjoyable, actually. And well, I was thinking, it's interesting that I chose to focus on curiosity and interest, because Bodhinaya is definitely somebody who's very curious and interested. So he really just seems very naturally interested in things and wants to find out about them. And so he asks a lot of questions. Yeah, he really wants to kind of know, to understand. And what I find comes with that also is a really sort of beautiful openness and receptivity. So I find that Bodhinaya doesn't fix things. He's just very open to sort of seeing what arises and what appears. So I think that is that's a really wonderful quality to take us into this exploration around the nature of mind. So I'm really glad that you're here, Bodhinaya, and very much looking forward to what you've got to share with us.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Well, I know you can, but I guess, can everyone hear me? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, good. Okay. Before I start, I just thought, I'd really like to rejoice in the merits of the Sangha team, actually. And as a sort of a guest speaker, if you like, I feel so well treated. And last time I did a talk, I think it was at the end of January, it was just marvellous the way the team looked after me, because it can be a bit of a nerve-wracking experience giving a talk, so being looked after really helps. And I was thinking, maybe that was a one-off, but apparently not. The path of regular steps. So yeah, thank you, the Sangha support team. It is good to feel so cared for, actually. So yes, I was very struck by what Kusala Devi said earlier about play and curiosity. And I guess I do have a natural propensity to being playful. And on the way up the steps, I was just thinking about a couple of definitions of play that I particularly like. And one is along the lines of play is about having a flexible attitude. Yeah, having a flexible attitude. And the other thing about play is that it happens in relationship. Yeah. So, I was very struck by the links there with the Bodhisattva ideal, this idea of playfulness and coming into relationship with others, which sort of characterizes very much the Bodhisattva ideal. And in a sense, in that kind of same spirit, during tonight's talk, which I am exploring even as I talk, I might be making connections that I've not made. So there was a sort of playful endeavor, even delivering a talk. And, and this talk is very much in that spirit of play or experimenting. Yeah. I particularly like that kind of way of thinking, certainly for my approach to the Dharma. It's an experiment. Yeah. And I'm particularly keen on experiments that last. And I would like to encourage people to make experiments that might be a couple of years. Because we live in a society, don't we, where an experiment might be, I'll try something today, and then if it doesn't work, I'll do something different tomorrow. But actually, I think that I really want to encourage you to sort of, commit to an experiment, because I think there's something in committing to an experiment where you can sort of, something arises in that action. So, as I've already said, tonight's talk is about nature of mind, and it's very much, an ongoing process for me. It's not static. It's, if you like, this talk is a reflection of where I am with my thinking, practice, and experiments. And later tonight, after this talk, it won't be the same talk. There's a sense in sharing something that changes it. So I'll probably look back on tonight's talk and probably see it quite differently to how I see it now. So that's the kind of warming up, really. So as I already said, tonight's talk is going to consider the Buddhist perspective on the nature of mind. But I'm also going to consider a contemporary perspective that I think resonates with traditional Buddhist thinking. And some of you who've listened and watched some of the Nature of Mind series will recognize the name Bernardo Kastrup, who was interviewed and did a talk on his philosophical perspective on the nature of mind. So I'll be exploring that as well tonight. And then I'm going to attempt to bring those two perspectives together, and see how they kind of sit with one another. So for the Buddha, the mind and the world weren't separate entities, okay? Our experience of the world is filtered through and shaped through our own bias, our own conditioning, our own experiences. And of course, your mind and my mind, they share the same fundamental characteristics. When we look at the world, it is filtered through our experience. We see the world through our lived and conditioned mind. We see the world through our habitual ways of being. So, for example, I'm white, I'm male, I'm working class, I'm middle-aged, unfortunately. I see the world very much through that kind of lens. It does inform, the way I am. So I see the world through all my lived experiences and history, as you do, even though we've all got our own, if you like, bias and conditioning. Our cultural background and our family, all this informs the way we look at the world. And as the Dhammapada says, experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. And Buddhism is really about mind. Mind shapes the world that we live in. And of course, as I've already said, the nature of mind is universal. Yes, we've got our own particular propensities, our own inclinations, our own habits, our own ways of being, but essentially mind often drives our experience. So our being in the world cannot be separated from our mind, any more than we can separate the dancer from the dance, to use that metaphor. We all have an experience, a different experience of the world based on the differences of our conditioned mind. So essentially, we all see the world through this unique lens called me. And of course, this talk is very much an example of that. I'm talking to you through very much the lens of my own experience, as I've already said. So when I look at the world, my conditioned mind is potentially reflected back at me. Okay, so I'll say a little bit more about that. We can't escape me. Me is everywhere to some extent. So sort of leading up to this talk, I did a couple of experiments. I'm going to share some of them tonight. And one of the experiments I did was just sort of looking at the world and seeing it as a reflection of me. And for some reason, it just sort of generated a bit more curiosity. I was sitting on the tram and looking out of the window and thinking, okay, what I'm looking at is a reflection of me. It's a reflection of my conditioned mind. And strangely, I found some kind of peace of mind about that. I don't quite know why, but I think it also made me much more curious about the world I was living in. Yeah. So I was looking at the world outside as if it was a mirror to me. So me is made up of all the experiences that I've had, all the habits I have, all the conditioning. And in some ways, it's a bit like me as a house, quite self-contained house, and then there is a world out there, and sometimes one can be so preoccupied with me, one aren't always aware there's something else going on. So it's a bit like, you open the window and you realize there's a much, much bigger world out there. So me, my habits, is a unique way of looking, perceiving and relating to the world. My relationship with the world is informed by my experiences. So we have certain leanings that inform the way we see the world. So for me, what I find helpful is, okay, me can be a problem because of the limitations that brings. And I think historically I might have tried to solve that problem, which is, quite a challenge really. But actually I think that's perhaps going about things the wrong way. I think it was more about coming into a new relationship with me. Yeah. So you can't solve the problem of me, but coming into a new relationship with me, for me, certainly changed my perspectives. And when I come into a new relationship with me, it gives me more choice, more options. I'm more creative and less reactive. Okay, so here gets the trickier bit. I'm going to try and attempt to share some of Bernardo Kastrup's thinking and link it up. And again, it's very much a work in progress for me. So I'll probably be using some contemporary language as well. So a lot of Bernardo Kastrup's thinking is around challenging materialism, which is where the world is seen to be outside and independent to consciousness. Okay, so it's like an empirical way of looking at the world, and it's often defined as sort of quantitative. So it's something that you measure. Often you might measure it with numbers. Yeah. So it's very much a theoretical abstraction. But it is a removal of consciousness. So this is materialism that Bernardo Kastrup is challenging. If you like, it's a removal of our experience of viewing the world in terms of materialism. But he challenges that. And one of the analogies that he uses, which I found quite helpful, is it's a bit like imagining we're in a cockpit of an aeroplane, okay? So you're flying high in the sky. Maybe you're flying somewhere nice, maybe Athens. But unfortunately, the weather outside isn't very good. Yeah, maybe there's some dark clouds, rain and thunder. The plane might be shaking. And the pilots, they can't see out. Yeah, they can't rely on any visual cues because they can't see anything. Yeah. So that's a bit of a problem, as you can imagine. However, they have dials on the cockpit, okay? And these dials help interpret the weather and the world outside of the plane. Speed, altitude, distance. Perhaps there's a compass. I think that's about the limit of my understanding of a cockpit. So don't trust me as your pilot. That's all I could say. So, of course, there's lots of other dials there. There might even. Is there any pilots here? Okay. So the dashboard is an interface to help the pilot deal with the reality of the world outside. Okay. It's an interface, and in the same way, we operate in a very similar way. Okay. We have an interface. Our experience of the world is like the dashboard in order to navigate safely the world out there. Okay. But we don't take the dials too literally. Okay. So the world outside there aren't the dials. There's something beyond the dials. Okay. It's just a way of dealing with reality. And it's an evolutionary way, or a survival model, okay? I'm not going to go into that because it does start to get a little bit more complex, but it is sort of based on an evolutionary survival model, yeah. The instrument panel is a way of seeing the world and a way of managing reality. It's, if you like, an evolutionary best guess and picture of reality in order to help us survive. So there's a couple of them, I don't know if they're metaphors or similes, but which I particularly liked. So one of these is from Bernardo Kastrup, and the other one is one I made up. So he talks about, if you go to a restaurant and you're looking at the menu, you might be looking at the salad and the veggie burgers and the fries and the curry and the soup, you're looking at all the cakes, But you wouldn't mistake the picture for the food, would you? You wouldn't start munching on the menu, the picture, think, oh, yeah, munch, munch. Yeah? There's a sense there that that's not reality. That's, if you like, an interface towards the food that you need to order. Okay? And again, in the same token, if you're looking at a holiday brochure, it's a bit grey in Nottingham, and you're looking at the holiday brochure and looking at the sunny beaches and the sunshine and the blue skies, and think, oh, I think I better get my suntan lotion on and my swimming costume on, and I'll just soak up the sun from the sort of holiday brochure. Yeah, well, I don't know. Maybe some of you do that, but but there's a sense there. Again, it's another interface, yeah, between what you're seeing and the real world. Okay, I was very proud of that little Yeah, thank you, Sajanama. Great, thank you. Yeah, it would be a cheap holiday, wouldn't it? That's for sure. Yeah. Now, of course you don't. You do not mistake the picture of the beach for the beach. Yeah. So again, just saying we have an interface that helps us manage reality. So there is a reality out there that I'm not directly experiencing. If you like, as I said, this sort of evolutionary survival model is there to potentially protect us from seeing the world as it really is. We kind of have a filtering process, which I'll say a little bit more about in a moment. So Bernardo Kastrup, he's sort of challenging this idea of a material world, this sort of quantitative world, and suggests that the reality is actually made up of mental processes. Not yours or mine alone, but other mental processes. You know, we might call that consciousness. Yeah. So there's other mental processes and consciousness out there that we might not have access to. So as I said earlier, over the last few weeks, preparing this talk, I've done a few experiments that I'm sort of sharing with you tonight. And this one particularly had quite an impact on me, and it may be an experiment you've tried. It's just imagining the world out there, everything out there as having a consciousness. And albeit very different to yours or mine. And there's something about this particular experiment for me, I think it just seemed to bring something to life. In some ways, quite a profound way. It just seemed to, it sort of made me wonder, actually, had I seen the world dead, actually. So just imagining that there is this consciousness and this aliveness out there, it sort of challenged, I think, a lot of my conditioning, which perhaps was to think in terms of perhaps, a kind of a dead world. So it's a bit like I had quite a narrow spectrum of awareness, and I think most of us are probably operating in a kind of a narrow spectrum of awareness. And as a species, we're very much operating in quite a narrow bandwidth. When actually there's all these other sort of consciousness and mental processes that we're not accessing for various reasons. So it's a bit like if you're thinking about your radio, it's like stuck in Radio 4. Not that I've got anything against Radio 4. I like Radio 4, but it's a bit like a default channel or a default station. Okay, and potentially quite a narrow bandwidth. And there are all these other bandwidths, all these other radio stations, if you like, that potentially we haven't got access to currently. Yeah. So, traditionally Buddhism would say these limitations, if you like, this narrow bandwidth might be because of greed, hatred, and delusion. Potentially, preventing us becoming wise and compassionate, from accessing all these other frequencies and consciousness and realities that might be operating beyond our kind of default frequencies. And of course, it can be very challenging seeing some aspects of the world as having a consciousness. Certainly, I'm challenged by that. I mean, Bhante Sangharakshita, was challenged by the notion of trying to consider a plastic bag having a consciousness. Yeah. or a cardboard box. You know, I'd be quite challenged by thinking of a cardboard box as having a consciousness. Yeah. But a tree, I'd find that much easier. Yeah. So something about the living world for me that would make that much, much easier to access. So that's certainly an experiment I've really liked, is just imagining trees. In fact, I probably have a propensity to that. Most of my life is just imagining trees as having a kind of consciousness. I think in part because they do so much to sustain our life. But it's interesting when you find out more about trees, you know, that notion of consciousness really starts to come even more to life. I remember watching this documentary where there was evidence to suggest that groups of trees would kind of group together to help another tree if it was in trouble in any way, perhaps if it was diseased or something. And then all these networks would start to group and resource together in order to feed that tree. So, you know, those sorts of facts, if you like, sort of for me help to feed into that sense that there is some kind of consciousness out there operating, you know, beyond my narrow frequency. And so Bhante made it quite clear that the enlightened mind needed to have this kind of awareness of a consciousness out there for enlightenment to be possible. So I think it can be very helpful to experiment with native folklore. Bhante sort of talks about how folklore can help make our highest ideals personal. You know, which is very much in the spirit of the sutta that Kusala Devi read, you know, earlier tonight. Just very much thinking about spirits and consciousness as sort of operating out there, all in some way for the good of all sentient beings. And I think this really brings my imagination to life. It really helps to fuel something that my usual reliance on the rational mind, my reliance on my overused brain, it sort of challenges that really. So sort of cultivating a relationship with the natural world can really potentially be helpful. Sort of challenges these views that we might have of the world, or are seeing ourselves as being separate, you know, by coming into more relationship with the world out there. So it's probably a lot easier to start with the natural world, coming into relationship with a natural world, having a sense of a tree or the natural world having a consciousness, than it might be starting with an oldie plastic bag. But, you know, if you're feeling, you know, if you've got that kind of, you know, strength behind you, it might work for you. Even a recyclable one. So Bhante talks about, how, you know, Christianity sort of kind of drove out a lot of our pagan roots in the West, yeah. But in India, you know, paganism, if you like, and pagan roots is much more natural for them, yeah. So, you know, the Eurocentric and Western mind can inhibit this kind of awareness, you know, of an alive world out there, or a consciousness operating beyond our own frequencies. So another experiment I've done, which really has really helped me, is sort of based around Carl Jung's ideas of synchronicity. And he talks about looking more closely at the world and seeing the connection between things. I've made quite a habit of practicing that. And what I really like about it is that it brings me more into relationship with, if you like, a consciousness out there that's beyond my control. You know, rather than sort of trying to get inside my head and solve the problem. If I start looking for patterns in things, it does sort of feel like I kind of let go of that egocentric tendency that I can have. And it probably sounds a little strange, but I think for me, I do start looking outside of myself. And I have noticed that there does feel like there's particular patterns that I start paying attention to. Yeah. So it sort of challenges my rational mind, you know, which is probably my default position. It challenges my overuse of myself, my ego. So this is one way I've experimented, if you like, with depersonalizing myself. So I'm just sort of quoting here from Joseph Campbell, who's quite a famous mythologist. Depersonalizing the self. And I think sometimes this can be perhaps the biggest problem we do, or certainly I encounter, just to take that a little bit further, you know, seeing dukkha as personal. Yeah, well, dukkha isn't personal, it's universal. But I think the problem is I make it personal. You know, I single myself out. Oh, you know, woe is Bodhi-nai, you know, as if I'm carrying, you know, all the problems of the world. But most of the experiences I'm having are probably shared. So for me, you know, one of my practices is depersonalizing the self by coming more into relationship with what's out there, imagining the world as alive, imagining there's a sort of consciousness, if you like. It just changes my position. It changes my relationship with myself. Yeah. Not quite sure how this next bit fits together, but I'm sure there is a connection there. But I think one of the dangers for me as a Buddhist is that I might use Buddhism to hold me together. When actually I need a practice that's, if you like, going to encourage me to fall apart. And I think, you know, when you go beyond yourself and you start, for me, looking at the world and the consciousness out there, it challenges that central ingredient that I think is me. And in some ways, things do fall apart. And things do break down. And to be honest, I did come to the movement, to Buddhism, to put myself together. Yeah. Well, that didn't work. Yeah. But there's a danger there that we all face, is that, you know, we use our practices to hold us together, to hold our ego in place. So this all does sound a little bit bonkers in a way, and in a sense, I think that's an important point in itself. Because I think when we follow our practices and the myth of our practice, there does need to be kind of an element of madness about it. You know, Joseph Campbell, again, made this very clear that there's something about myth that's sort of obsessive. There is something about what we're doing here as a Sangha that's a bit bonkers, yeah? That it challenges, if you like, conventional ways of being, yeah? So coming into relationship with the world, coming into this sort of idea, if you like, there is another consciousness out there. It challenges our ego. It challenges this notion of me. It challenges this kind of default position that I have, where I see myself as separate from the world. But it brings myself into a dynamic. So as I said at the beginning of this talk, play is about coming into relationship with other. Yeah. And as a psychotherapist, I was very struck by a sort of famous child psychoanalyst who talked about the notion of psychotherapy was coming into play and bringing the patient into a playful relationship. And I think there's a lot in that notion that for me really resonates with being a Buddhist, about bringing the other, the outside of me, into relationship. Yeah. And it's that challenges, if you like, my separateness. So I'm going to go back to Bernardo Kastrup and see if we can make a few more connections here. So again, he talked about seeing the world mentally, yeah, not seeing it as just materialist and objectively quantifiable, if you like, but seeing it as consciousness. We see the world through our survival instincts. Essentially, that's what he's saying. The dashboard is a way of managing the reality out there. So I think this happens on a macro and a micro level. The macro being, as a human species, yeah, we have this dashboard, if you like, that's enabled us to survive. And then, of course, we have the micro, which is our own particular experience of the world, our own particular way of being me. He talks about our mental processes being made up of smells and flavors and rhythms and all these other kinds of inner representations that, if you like, are all qualitative. They all inform our consciousness. And there is an objective world out there that's also made of mental processes, not just physical alone. Okay? Consciousness that are primary for Bernardo Kastrup's kind of thinking. So I don't know. So I'm listening to myself, and I'm still challenged by this. I'm not in it. I don't want to mislead anyone and say I completely get this, because I don't get it. Yeah. I kind of understand it on one level, but on another I don't. And I think this is, again, a really important point, and one of Bante's favorite aphorisms is, finding emotional equivalents to our intellectual understanding. Yeah. So I sort of kind of struggling with it, but I want to play with it. I want to experiment. I want to see what comes of those experiments. Just me reading it and reading books and thinking about it ain't going to do it for me. I need to sort of play, see what might come into my experience, something that might give me more curiosity, more questions. So for me, my practice is not about having answers. It's about having more and more questions, yeah. In fact, I'm a bit skeptical of answers, yeah. So when these experiments, in the sense that I've been playing with, are only ask more and more questions. And rather embarrassingly, really embarrassing, I thought I knew what enlightenment was. And I realized with some of these experiments, actually, I hadn't got a clue. In some ways, it was quite unsettling. In some ways, my views were breaking down. And actually, I think with that came quite a bit of freedom. Just realizing I hadn't got a clue what an enlightened being was. It was just off my radar, yeah. but the enlightened mind is in some ways another frequency out there, and this is how I was started to perceive it. And in some ways, it sort of brought a little bit more life to my daily practice. So every morning I chant a mantra, my sadhana mantra, Padmasambhava. And it was almost like I was imagining that there was this sort of frequency out there, an enlightened mind frequency, and there was something about chanting my mantra that was in some ways trying to kind of, a bit like a radio, trying to tune into a frequency that I don't have access to. So it kind of brought a bit more life to my practice. I wasn't meant to say that then, so that's thrown me a little bit. That was meant for later. So the other thing I've started sort of playing with is let's say we all went on retreat together. There is no retreat. There is no objective out there retreat. There's about 20 of us in the shrine room and about 15, online. And if we all went on the same retreat, we'd all have a completely different experience of the retreat. So there is no objective retreat. There's just 35 different retreats all going on at the same time. And it's the same for Sangha as well. We've all got a completely different idea about what Sangha is. There is no objective Sangha. We've just got all these different experiences of Sangha in Nottingham. And of course, if you went to another Buddhist centre, you might have another experience of what Sangha is, or if you went abroad, if you went to New Zealand or you went to India, again, you'd have another experience of what Sangha is. So in a sense, what I'm challenging here is that we sometimes can operate in a materialistic way by fixing things, having this sense that something, that even enlightenment is some boxed up thing somewhere. Well, there are only enlightened beings. There's only an enlightened mind. There is no enlightenment. But we can get closer to the experiences of the enlightened mind, these other frequencies, this other consciousness that we don't have access to, by chanting the mantras. And, when we broaden our awareness, when we become more mindful, then we kind of set up the conditions where we might be able to sort of make contact with this other consciousness that we don't always have access to. And of course, there's times when we might start accessing, when we have particularly strong meditations or when our ethics is good, that has the potential to open us up to these different frequencies, as I like to call them. So the world out there is not how we think it is. Our dashboard is now showing the reality of the world as it appears on its dials. We have a limited and filtered process of what reality is. It's a bit like, we've got this screen and that, there might be a crack in it, and you sort of looking through the crack and then imagining from that small crack what everything else is like. So in some ways, we operate in a way to simplify our lives. Our survival mode is to simplify things. Our perception of the world is simplified in order to manage it. And James Hillman talks about how, there's a strong tendency and a desire to oversimplify things and make them literal. So literalism is when you sort of kind of quite a rigid interpretation, yeah. And I think what James Hillman is doing is trying to amplify our experience, make it more complex to some extent, and consider all the possibilities, yeah. Or if you like to use another way, all the frequencies, yeah. So certainly for me, I've got quite a strong Christian conditioning which moves towards literalism, and so it's just something I need to be careful of, even though I like to be playful, and I have a strong conditioning that limits me seeing beyond, seeing the possibilities. So what really struck me thinking and preparing this talk, how it kind of made sense that we do have a propensity to fixing things. Of course, it makes things simpler. There's so much going on out there. It's only natural that one would want to try and fix things and have fixed views in order to simplify things. There's another way of managing the reality out there, or trying to control what's beyond me. So we're doing this all the time. So I also thought it would be helpful just to be thinking about, well, how can we bring all this sort of thing down to a very practical level? How can we recognize our tendency to simplify things, our tendency to, if you like, go beyond the limitations of our own perspective? And I think this can happen on lots of levels. I'm sure certainly what I often find myself, if someone says, I don't feel very good today, I have a particular frequency that I start tapping into, and it usually centers around what that means for me. So I have this idea when someone says, I don't feel that good today, I have a particular idea about what that means. But if I don't ask them what they mean, it's sort of quite easy for me to project onto them what I think they mean. So sort of just asking that question, what do you mean by that? And suddenly you realize how many assumptions that you might be bringing to that relationship in order to manage it, because we're filtering all the time. But it also brings us into relationship, yeah. Or equally, someone says, I'm feeling really happy today. You think, okay, well, what does happy mean for them? And then they start talking about it, and you think, that's nothing like what I was imagining. Yeah. And in some ways it adds complexity, but it also brings us into relationship. It takes us beyond our conditioning. It takes us beyond our habitual ways of thinking. Okay, I think I'm going to pause there because I'm aware of time, and I'd quite like just to end again with the Ratana Sutta. And then if there's any questions or comments that I can take them. So yeah, just before I read the Ratana Sutta again, it's again the essence that I think I've been exploring tonight is about coming into relationship, yeah, coming into relationship with the world, going beyond the limitations of the self, having a new relationship with me. Whatever beings are assembled here, whether of the earth or air, may you all be happy. Please listen now to what I say. Please send your metta day and night toward the human race, on whose behalf we make this offering. Please give us your protection. We are your friends. And all you fleshy beings and spirits, gather round. Let us together salute the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. The Tathagata is honoured by gods and men. May there be peace. Okay. What do I do with the mic?
Oh, just to let people online know if that's what you want to do.
Okay. Just take it off.
Wait, keep it on.
And then if someone's got a question,
I've got another mic if someone's got
oh, okay, okay. Again, like I said earlier, I haven't got answers. I've only got more questions. So I don't know where that's going to take us. Yeah, we've got about 7 minutes, yeah. Or comments, or, yeah, Anthony, yeah.
I'm always interested in the statement that we have rational minds. And does that fix us by staying there? Because if you look at kind of modern philosophy, you look at quantum physics, you look at relativity, that rationality goes out of the window. And is it a way of fixing it despite what we experience or despite what we explore in the world? Is it something that we feel safe with rather than something that's we experience outside? Is that a question? I can't do question marks.
I can give you a response to that, which might be of help or not. I suppose, I'm not in any way slamming the rational mind. I think what I'm talking about is maybe an over-reliance on it. So for me, it's about coming into balance. Could be, in a sense, I'm quite reliant on it. But I was also very struck by what you said, because I think, as I did a talk some months ago, I think it's sometimes the language we use can condition our mind. So, for example, if I use the word hate a lot in my communication, that can condition that condition for hateful feelings. And in the same way, I think maybe using that kind of language, like the rational mind, has its own kind of conditioning effect as well. So that's my response. I'm not sure if that in any way helps or informs. But yeah, that was the first sort of couple of thoughts I had in response to that. Yeah. Anyone else?
It's not really a question, but I just I felt really kind of moved when you spoke about Buddhism kind of encouraging us to fall apart, and just the image of the vow of Avalokiteshvara came to mind when he kind of splits into 1,000 pieces, and then he falls apart, and then something new emerges then from that. This kind of more, from that open space, something else then emerges, and I'm just feeling quite moved by what you said, and then in relation to the Bodhisattva ideal as well.
I think there's something for me about play and curiosity as conditions for falling apart. as I sort of talked earlier about this sort of flexible attitude. And I think for me, coming into relationship with this sort of conscious world out there is another way of falling apart. And it was interesting. I was reading the Ratna Sutta before tonight downstairs, and I felt really moved, and I thought, oh my goodness, what's going on? But there was a real sense of relief, actually, just playing with this possibility that there is a consciousness out there beyond what I can see. It just sort of opened up something that I can't find words for, but it kind of excited me and warmed me. Mm. Mm.
I've got, again, I don't know if this is a question or it's something I'm thinking about. This talk about the nature of mind in Buddhism, and the famous Dhammapada quote, experiences are led by mind, preceded by mind, shaped by mind. I think it's quite easy to understand that, or I've understood that, as somehow mind is kind of omnipotent or separate from other non-mental factors. Partly because we got this whole mind-matter split in Western culture so deeply. But it's like mind can't exist without other levels of being. But it's easy to get this understanding that somehow mind could exist without the physical and the biological and all of that. So there's something about the way mind is spread through the 5 niyamas, the teaching of these 5 levels of conditionality.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just something I'm reflecting on, but I don't know if you've got anything of interest to say on that.
No, I resonated with that. I had, in sort of thinking about the talk, I realized that the mind needs the world out there for it to be mind. It needs a context for it to operate. That's as far as I got with that. And so there's something in what you're saying that really resonates with me. Yeah.
I think it's something about agency. That Buddhist, the Buddha saying, it's like saying that the mind is it's easy to understand that the mind is the sole shaping agent of our experience, which I'm not sure I'm in agreement with that. It's like we exist in this world where physical laws are in operation and they have agency. They affect my consciousness. It's not just a one-way thing from mind to biological levels of conditionality or levels of conditionality. See what I mean? So it's very important to, I think, to see it as a two-way thing.
Like a co-creation?
It's that. But it's easy to understand what Buddhism's saying is saying mind's so predominant that it can totally shape the physical world, or it can exist independent from it, neither of which I think are accurate.
Sorry, we can't hear online. What's happened to the mic? The other mic.
Just briefly summarise that, if you can. Yeah.
Sorry, not to include you, online beings. I'm just saying, I think it's easy to take the Buddhist teaching on mind and the nature of mind and experiences being led by mind, shaped by mind, preceded by mind, as saying that mind is the dominant or even soul-shaping force and has the ability to change the physical, the biological, the other levels of conditionality, the other niyamas, or that it can exist separate from them. And my current thinking on that is that it's neither of those. It's something much subtler that the Buddha's trying to get at. But anyway, I've just realized that I think I've taken that teaching and given mind sort of almost more prominence than it has. if that makes sense.
Mm.
This is just one of my topics of reflection I'm still experimenting and exploring with. So
Yeah, and on that kind of same spirit, I mean, what did the Buddha say? You know, he says, don't take my word for it, you know, test it out for yourselves. So we'll end up on that note. Okay.